Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here, how stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?
Welcome to Strange Things, broadcasting from the Arkanasa Radio Studios in Laredo, Texas. And welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Tonight, we're going to be talking about Atlantis, the lost city or continent, depending how big this thing actually was. But first, this. A lot of the folks living on our street do Halloween in a different way. Instead of waiting for the doorbell to ring, we set up tables along the sidewalk and the kids come up for their treats. We decorate the tables and some of our neighbors even dress up. It's kind of like a block party. At the end of the block, a couple of people had dressed up in T-Rex costumes, and they were either dancing or fighting. It was kind of hard to tell. These were those full-body suits, and they looked pretty neat. It attracted a lot of attention to our neighborhood. At the Emerald Downs racetrack in July, they held a T-Rex race. People dressed up in their favorite dinosaur costume, well, favorite if they're really into T-Rex. They gathered at the starting gate, and then they tried to run the track dressed up in dino garb. This is the third year the Muckleshoot tribe in Auburn, Washington, who owns the track, held a dinosaur race. It looked like there were about 27 participants, all trying to make the finish line first. They had to double and triple up in the starting gate stalls. When the gates opened, it was a sight to see as all the T-Rexes came hurtling out. A normal horse track is 1 1/8 miles long, but these creatures only had to run the first section. Maybe 1/8 of a mile, but considering how they were dressed, I think they did okay. Regular unleaded won the race by a few inches. The bizarre-themed race all started out when the Tri-Guard Pest Control of nearby Renton asked to do something out of the ordinary for their employees. They held a Hawaiian-themed race, which was probably a lot easier to run in. The next year, it was a toga party, like in Animal House, but without all the drunks. 2017, it was decided to run the race dressed as dinosaurs. In just a few years, the company says its annual group outing at the track somehow evolved into its sales reps sprinting down a horse track wearing floppy dinosaur suits. People were actually betting on which of the dinosaurs would win the race. If you're into Bigfoot and would like a great time, get ready to attend the Texas Bigfoot Conference in Jefferson, Texas, October 19th. The speakers will be Lyle Blackburn. If you haven't heard Lyle speak, you're missing what has been described as warm syrup poured over pancakes. Somebody said that to him a couple years ago, and, well, the description has stuck. Ken Gerhardt will be there, and Ken has been on the show in the past. He's always interesting to listen to. Unfortunately, the several times that I've had Ken on the show, only one of them made it to the air. There's always some problem with either the recording device, his telephone, my computer, but each and every time I've had Ken on the show, things have gone sideways on me. But Ken will be in Jefferson, Texas. He's always a good person to listen to. Chester Moore will be on hand. Chester has also been on the show as well. Great guy, really knows his stuff. Chevy Shelley, Covington, Montana. Shelley traveled the Midwest searching for Bigfoot. She had a camper decked out for her living accommodations, and she spent, I believe, the summer out in the Midwest searching different areas where Bigfoot had been sighted. James Bobo Fay. If you ever watched Finding Bigfoot, Bobo is far better in real life. We ran into him at the Huntsville, South Texas Bigfoot Conference. There was a line of people waiting to get their pictures taken, and so me and my wife thought, well, what the heck, never get this opportunity too often. So we got in line and we stood there for maybe about 20 minutes. As we're almost up to the front of the line, the conference management came along and they drug him back to the vendor section, saying that he had a crowd waiting for him over there as well. Well, it was lunch break and we didn't have anything else to do, so me and my wife went over and we got back in line once again. This time I think we waited about 30 minutes. Well, finally I got up to the front of the line. My wife got her picture taken with him, and then I stepped up, and as I was getting my photo taken, Bobo was in the process of eating lunch. So in the pictures he looks like he's got the mumps or something. His cheeks are pudged out with food. But, well, I did get to have my picture taken with him. Cliff Barrickman is going to be at the Jefferson Conference. I interviewed Cliff for the show one night. I hit the playback button, and his voice came out nothing but static. I sent Cliff a note telling him what had happened, and he said, call me right back and we'll do it again. I actually interviewed Cliff for about 3 hours to do a 1-hour show. You don't find that kind of nice activity all the time, but Cliff is a nice person, always willing to help out. A Saturday's dinner will be provided by the Riverport Barbecue. No one does barbecue quite like they do. You won't want to eat anywhere else after that. You can check out the Facebook page, Texas Bigfoot Research Center, for all the details. Somehow I need to get Craig Woolheater on the show, but he still has a job and hard to get a hold of. October 16th, which is a Wednesday, at 6:30 p.m. I'll be at the Laredo Public Library on McPherson talking about my book, Fort McIntosh and the Paranormal. The presentation should run about an hour. I'll have my books there if you'd like to get a copy. I sell my books for $10 each because I think it's a decent price. I'm not a TV star and I don't have thousands of fans, so I try to keep my books low enough that folks will buy them, and then I don't have to make change. At Amazon, the books run $12, and you don't get them signed. So, if you're in town and you're not too busy on October 16th from 6:30 to 7:45, I'll be at the main library on McPherson. Tonight's show was requested by Michael Anthony Sanchez. He sent me a few ideas, and I latched onto Atlantis right away. I've always been fascinated by stories of past civilizations that rose, fell, and vanished into history. This turned out to be a lot of reading of both possible historic accounts and folks that think Atlantis could never have existed. You can't read just one side of the argument and come away with a decent idea on what happened. You have to get both sides and then kind of filter out what you believe to be correct. According to ancient texts, the high Egyptian priest of Sais spoke to Salon about Atlantis, a continent that existed more than 10,000 years ago that was beyond the Pillars of Heracles, or as we know him, Hercules, which is now considered to be the Rock of Gibraltar. Was it Gibraltar? Well, we're not really sure. Scientists are only guessing at the actual location. The pillars might just have disappeared in some earthquake or global catastrophe. The Timaeus Dialogue, which is a speech or dialogue by Plato, placed the island in the Atlantic Ocean. The initial idea was that Atlantis was somewhere between Europe and the Americas, though many other suggestions have been proposed, some of which place Atlantis in the Antarctica, Greece, and Indonesia. I can see Atlantis being out in the Atlantic Ocean. After all, it was beyond the Pillars of Hercules. How some folks came to decide it was anywhere around Greece is beyond me, since Greece is in the Mediterranean and not past Gibraltar. Of course, if the pillars no longer exist, they could have been anywhere. Yes, Indonesia sounds like a bit of a stretch. Unless you take into consideration you would have to sail beyond the Pillars of Hercules to travel to Indonesia, or Antarctica maybe. Once you're past the pillars, you're in the Atlantic Ocean, named after the Greek god Atlas. Its name means Sea of Atlas. Atlas was the guy supposed to be holding the earth up. Here's something to know. The very first collection of maps placed in book form had a picture of Atlas on the cover. From then on, any book of maps was called an atlas. It's amazing what you can pick up watching TV shows like Pawn Stars. During World War II, a Captain Rogue named his German auxiliary cruiser, which is also known as a merchant raider, Atlantis. I've always wondered where and why he chose that name. I read the book written by Bernhard Rogue and his first officer Wolfgang Frank. They said that Hitler allowed the captains to pick the names of their ships, but he never went into why Rogue went with Atlantis. The ship Atlantis still holds the world's record for sailing 23 months without ever putting into port. According to the legend, Atlantis was the home of the god Poseidon. The place was initially given to him when the gods divided the world between themselves. Each god ruled his or her own territory. Poseidon formed the island and lived there with his wife and children. He created alternate round zones of water and land so that the center of the island was surrounded by water and it could not be accessible by men. He had 10 children and thus divided Atlantis into 10 portions. Atlas was Poseidon's firstborn son, and Atlantis got the name from him. Other legends say Atlantis was an advanced civilization, rich and prosperous with everything in abundance. A paradise, if you would, according to Plato. The inhabitants were a great power who opposed both Europe and Asia, and they were able to navigate the seas. A great fight is mentioned between the goddess Athena and the Atlanteans. With the help of Athena, the Athenians managed to win the battle and protect Athens against the Atlanteans. Too many A's. Athenian democracy developed around the 6th century BC in the Greek city-state of Athens, comprising the city of Athens and the surrounding territory of Attica, and is often described as the first known democracy in the world. Back then, you didn't have great big countries like Germany or the United States. Instead, there were small city-states that consisted of 1 or 2 walled cities and the surrounding countryside. These folks never heard of the adage, live and let live. If you wanted something, you just marched on your neighbors and took it. And this led to a lot of battles being fought all around the Mediterranean. On the island continent of Atlantis, or the group of islands all connected by common thought, every king made the place better than the one before. They reached the peak of their society and attained very high spiritual values, but human nature eventually got the upper hand. The values of the Atlanteans began to deteriorate. Their behavior changed, and they even defied the gods. It was Zeus who, seeing how an honorable race had become corrupted, decided to punish them, gathering the other gods to decide their fate. The rest of the dialogue of Critias is lost, however. The end is mentioned in the Timaeus, where, in one night, violent earthquakes and floods punished Atlantis, and the whole island disappeared into the depths of the sea. Atlantis was supposed to have been as big as Asia Minor, which is modern-day Turkey, and Libya, a combination of land that would come to about 1 million square miles. Of course, we don't know exactly how big these countries were back thousands of years ago. Even when Plato was telling his story 2,500 years ago, these countries could have been a lot smaller than they are today. If the size was about right, Atlantis was about a quarter of the size of continental United States. Pangaea was a supercontinent that existed on the Earth millions of years ago, and it covered about a third of the Earth's surface. With something called continental drift, the land masses broke up and the continents wound up where they are today. The water between Europe and the Americas is one popular location for Atlantis. You can take all the continents and put them together like a giant jigsaw puzzle. There are gaps here and there, but this would be accounted for by all the little islands and wear and tear over time. Whether you're a creationist or you believe in evolution, the Earth could have gone through these changes over the time it took for the Earth to be formed. Since time was kind of fluid at that time, 6 days might have been a lot longer than our 24-hour clock could handle. Kind of like how 40 days and 40 nights is mentioned in the Bible a lot. This isn't 960 hours of time. In Hebrew, 40 days means it's longer than a week. At the time of the Jews in the Bible, the number 40 wasn't generally used to signify a specific number, but rather more used as a general term for a larger figure. When it was used in terms of time, it simply meant a long time. Thus that phrase, 40 days and 40 nights, was just another way of saying a really long time. This could have meant months or even years, or decades. Mohenjo-Daro was, without a doubt, one of the most important cities of South Asia and the Indus civilization, together with Harappa, which was one of the first and most important ancient settlements of the world. Mohenjo-Daro had a sewer system thousands of years ago. This was when sewage in Europe was being dumped in the streets and flowed on its own into rivers, making the water toxic. Mohenjo-Daro was considered to be an advanced society that far surpassed anything the archaeological folks will tell you was available at the time. According to some researchers, the densely populated ancient city was destroyed nearly instantaneously 6,000 to 10,000 years ago by a huge explosion, which, according to ancient alien theorists and other researchers, was caused by the detonation of a nuclear weapon. They mostly agree the city was wiped from the map in a single day, perhaps in the blink of an eye. The sand in and around the ancient city is melted into a form of glass. Bricks have been found that are burned black on one side. The destruction is located right in the center of the city, and it radiates outwards in a near perfect circle. The following quote can be found in the Mahabharata. White hot smoke that was 1,000 times brighter than the sun rose in infinite brilliance and reduced the city to ashes. Water boiled. Horses and war chariots were burned by the thousands. The corpses of the fallen were mutilated by the terrible heat so that they no longer looked like human beings. J. Robert Oppenheimer was the scientific director of the Manhattan Project, the U.S.'s World War II project to develop the first nuclear weapons. As the first American atomic bomb was touched off, he said, "We knew the world would no longer be the same." A few people laughed, a few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture. I'm not even going to try that word. Bhagavad Gita. Yeah, I did try it. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him, take on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another. Oppenheimer said, "This was the first nuclear explosion in modern time." This was 1945. He firmly believed that weapons of destruction on such a scale as the one dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki had already been used in the Battle of Kurukshetra 4,000 to 6,000 years before. Thus, he acknowledged this fact by using the term "in modern times." So, what does this have to do with Atlantis? There's a theory out there that says that the two biggest kids on the block, Atlantis and Mohenjo-Daro, were at odds with each other. Either they both wanted to be the one and only superpower on the planet, or they wanted to take what the others had. Whichever it was, they decided that the other had to go. What was it they kept saying in Highlander? There can be only one. If Atlantis was in the Atlantic Ocean, then these two would have been about 9,000 miles apart. Could they or would they even have known about each other? Mohenjo-Daro sits close to the Indus River. This is a good-sized river, and it might have been a major source of travel back in the old times. Atlantis was an island. At the time, the quickest form of travel would have been by ship. Maybe the two had encountered each other at times, and somebody said something that upset somebody, and the next thing you know, a war broke out. There's also the possibility that one or both of these cities had flying machines. This is not a recent idea. The Nazis were interested in studying Indian culture and reading their old scrolls in order to design and build a Wunderwaffen, which is a wonder weapon. The Nazi bell is supposed to have been created after General Kammler was able to translate the Indian texts. Plato said, Now in this island of Atlantis there was a great and wonderful empire, which had rule over the whole island and several others, and over parts of the continent, and furthermore, the men of Atlantis had subjected the parts of Libya within the columns of Hercules as far as Egypt and Europe, as far as Tyrrhenia, which is part of Italy today. The Atlanteans were said to have built machines that could travel through the air and water. Now we have two superpower cities that both had flying machines. This would have made contact a lot easier and hostilities a lot quicker. One branch of thought is that the folks in Atlantis sent a nuclear weapon over the city of Mohenjo-Daro and destroyed it. Afterwards, the people living in the Indus Valley retaliated by destroying Atlantis in the same manner. There's also a theory that both cities were destroyed by the same beings, the gods who grew weary of the Atlanteans and the people of Mohenjo-Daro trying to become like them. The Atlanteans were dabbling with genetics, trying to create new and never before seen animals, and maybe men. There's also the possibility that the people of Mohenjo-Daro were doing likewise. Not wanting these upstarts from creating things that shouldn't be here, the gods sent their armies down to take out both cities. Since Mohenjo-Daro was on land, well away from the coast, parts of the city remain to be studied today. Atlantis, being an island, was destroyed and what was left sunk below the ocean. This was to have taken place far back as 10,000 BC or as recently as 5,000 BC, depending on which stories you read. Over the years, the search for Atlantis has wound up in all manner of location. One investigator thinks the island was located where the Canary Islands are today. The location is right in that they are beyond the Pillars of Hercules, but there are no concentric rings making up the Canaries. Then, if the island was destroyed thousands of years ago, maybe this is all that's left of a once great nation. Another idea came up saying Atlantis was located right next to Great Britain. This landmass would have linked Britain with the coast of Belgium and the Netherlands. The land, now submerged under the English Channel, is about the size of Great Britain. It was called Doggerland. It has sometimes been referred to as the Stone Age Atlantis of Britain, or a prehistoric Garden of Eden. The scientists are just now getting a chance to study this underwater area. The trouble with saying Atlantis was in the area called Doggerland is Atlantis was an island. Had Doggerland not sunk into the water, Great Britain would have been a part of mainland Europe. Some scientists said they found Atlantis in the marshland south of Cadiz, Spain. They used ground-penetrating radar and scanned the marsh. They say they have found what they think is the remains of a city underneath the muddy ground. This city was inundated by a tsunami and the city sank under the muddy land. The inhabitants are supposed to have built a memorial city on the coast of Spain where Cadiz is today. What the scientists have found is an old city, but there's no evidence it was Atlantis. So far, all they have to go on is some submerged stone buildings. Now, the site is past the Pillars of Hercules, and that's about as far as their proof goes. With that, I'm going to take a brief pause, give my throat a chance to get caught back up. All this talking has a tendency to make my throat hurt, and I need some coffee. So, don't go away. We'll be right back after this. You're listening to Arkanasa Radio. Did you go out UFO hunting and couldn't focus on the sky? Swing on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle Del Norte, right across from the Embassy Suites. That's not a weather balloon, that's a flying saucer. Did you hear a bump in the night and you think it just might be a ghost? Contact the Laredo Paranormal Research Society at laredoparanormal@hotmail.com. That's the LPRS for all your otherworldly needs. Are you taking care of your skin, or are you going to wait and see how time treats you? Take care today by contacting Lourdes James, Independent Beauty Consultant, at 956-723-3019. Don't let time get the best of you. Back in 1776, someone said, "Give me coffee or give me death." And if that's how you feel, you should be at the Organic Man Coffee Truck. They make coffee the right way, one delicious cup at a time. 4501 McPherson, Suite number 9. Coffee, the stuff dreams are made of. This is Arkanasa Radio you've been listening to. And welcome back to the show. Several remnants of volcanic eruptions that wiped out cities near Greece have been touted as being Atlantis. The trouble, besides not being past Gibraltar, is the area is way too small. Plato said the Atlantis was supposed to be as big as Asia Minor and Libya combined, about 1 million square miles of land. Had Atlantis been in the Mediterranean, there would have been no room for the water. The Mediterranean covers 965,255 square miles. Atlantis would have pretty much wiped out the entire Mediterranean. Now, scientists have found all manner of sunken city remains at the bottom of the Mediterranean, but this would not be an island no matter how you looked at it. In order to be as big as Plato said, it would still need to be an island. It would have to have been in the Atlantic, middle of an ocean, or maybe even the Pacific. There are those that think that it might have been where Cuba is today. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the world just about exploded, submarines were patrolling the waters around Cuba, and they spotted what looked like pyramids on the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico. No, they weren't looking out a window. They saw these using sonar. The sonar images were interpreted into looking like pyramids. These locations were documented as navigational obstacles, and that was later used by scientists who went looking for Atlantis. Two scientists, Paul Wengswig and Pauline Zalitke, working off the coast of Cuba and using a robot submersible, confirmed that a giant city existed at the bottom of the Gulf just to the west of Cuba. They filmed huge pyramids and sphinxes as well as buildings, all below 400 feet of water. In the Yucatan culture, they say that the Olmecs originated on an island that sunk after a cataclysm. This island was called Atlantiku. In 2001, the two scientists found the sunken city, built in the pre-classic period and populated by an advanced civilization similar to the early Teotihuacan culture. Teotihuacan. Oh, yeah. I should have my wife here to pronounce these for me. Teotihuacan culture of the Yucatan. Researchers using sonar equipment have discovered at a depth of about 2,200 feet a huge land plateau with clear images of what appear to be urban development partially covered by sand. From above, the shapes resemble pyramids, roads, and buildings. This sounds like a neat sight and all, but once again the area isn't big enough to hold an island the size of Atlantis is supposed to be. The Gulf of Mexico is about half the size of the Mediterranean. Of course, Plato might have given the size wrong. Or maybe Turkey and Libya were a lot smaller then. Let's say half. Still, the Gulf of Mexico is only 600,000 square miles of surface area. Atlantis wouldn't qualify as being an island even then. I've also found a few articles that described Atlantis as being more like a city-wide island or a set of islands, an archipelago like Hawaii. If Atlantis was more like a city, it would fit into a lot more sites people claim to have found. Maybe what Weinswig and Zalitke had found is a small settlement that was in conjunction with Atlantis. Maybe this is where the rich folks went to relax, or how about a religious sect that was apart from Atlantis, but in the vicinity? The Bermuda Triangle is located from the island of Bermuda in the north. A line runs south to Puerto Rico, then turns west to Miami, Florida, and then back to Bermuda. The triangle covers about 500,000 square miles, just a bit smaller than the Gulf of Mexico. Somehow, some folks have come to believe that Amelia Earhart vanished in the Bermuda Triangle, even though she was on the other side of the planet when she went missing. The Mary Celeste was way too far north to be credited with the triangle as well, yet some folks think it is also a part of the story of the triangle. Just because a ship or a plane vanishes, it doesn't have to be connected to the Bermuda Triangle, but this doesn't stop a few people from lumping them in there. Well, there are a lot of people that say that Atlantis was in the middle of the Bermuda Triangle. With so many odd things going on in the triangle, this sounds like a possible explanation. Ships and planes have vanished without a trace over hundreds of years. As far back as men have sailed the area. Back in June 14th, 2018, I did a show on the Bermuda Triangle, so I won't go into the bizarre activities this time. The Sargasso Sea is in the same area, just a bit farther to the east, and the two do overlap. A giant ocean gyre, 3 million square miles of ocean, a swirl in a circle, and there is hardly any wind. I did a show August 17th, 2017 about this ocean anomaly, so once more I'll skip over the details. People have said the disappearances might be connected to some underwater power source that affects ships and planes, causing them to move into some alternative dimension. John Hutchison says the triangle is connected to the Dragon's Triangle, which is on the other side of the planet. Ships and planes vanish from this side of the planet and wind up on that side, and Also, they disappear from that side and wind up on this. If you know anything about ley lines, alignments of places of significance in the geography or culture of an area, often include man-made structures, sometimes spiritual and mystical alignments of landforms. Ley lines were first discovered in 1921 by amateur archaeologist Alfred Watkins. He noticed that ancient sites at different points around the world all fell into sort of alignment. Be these sites man-made or natural, they all fell into a pattern, usually a straight line. He called these lines leys, and later they became ley lines. The Bermuda Triangle is in line with the Great Pyramids of Giza, maybe on some ley line. I've heard it said that the Great Pyramid of Giza were used as a power source. The design was used to concentrate energy and project it either around the city or out to space. In 1968, Ray Brown, a professional diver, discovered what he is convinced was an Atlantis in the bottom of the Bermuda Triangle. He found a translucent crystal pyramid that rose from the seabed. They have no idea why the structure is there, and this led to some believing it is the remnants of Atlantis. According to sonar readings, this pyramid is larger than the Great Pyramid in Egypt. They said there are two holes at the very top of the structure and that these periodically suck water in. This action causes a vortex in the ocean water and a surge of waves and mist on the surface of the sea. Some scientists have theorized that these vortexes are causing some, if not all, of the bizarre activity in the triangle. The sleeping prophet, Edgar Cayce, did a few readings where he mentioned Atlantis. A few as in 700 times. Of all the interesting people that have walked to this earth, Cayce is in the top 5, maybe the top 2. Edgar Cayce lived from 1887 until 1945. He read the Bible one time for each year that he lived. When Edgar was young, he discovered he could absorb a book simply by sleeping on it, literally. He could place his head on the book, and when he woke, he knew everything in it. This would come in handy during college, but he never went. Edgar developed laryngitis to a point that he couldn't speak. While under hypnosis, he could talk just fine. So, he gave himself a diagnosis and was able to cure himself. This led to hundreds and then thousands of people requesting his services. I did a show on Edgar Cayce, so I won't go over the rest of his bizarre and amazing life. If you want to know more, I suggest you read There Is a River by Thomas Segru. It tells his entire story. The predictions and visions of Edgar Cayce on Atlantis were about its discovery, history, and destruction. He said that a new land would appear in either 1968 or 69 off the east coast of North America. He called it the Rising of Atlantis. 1968, the Bimini Road was discovered in the Atlantic Ocean. A plane flying over Bimini, which is due east from Miami, spotted what looked like stone-paved road under the water. Edgar Cayce maintained that Atlantis was the first civilization which was technologically superior to even our own. He added that its last surviving island have disappeared somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean some 10,000 years ago. Casey revealed that the size of Atlantis was equal to that of Eurasia, 21 million square miles of land. He saw visions of this continent of the past which had gone through 3 major periods of division. The first 2 occurred around 15,600 BC, when the mainland divided into islands. The 3 main islands of Atlantis were Poseida, Og, and Iron. He said that the Atlanteans were well versed in technology that harnessed the power of the quantum world. This included the use of crystals and sound waves for healing. Elevators and connecting tunnels operated with compressed air and steam, and they used quartz crystal science to mine gold, copper, and silver from the earth. The Atlanteans were adept at the use of silicone chips at levels unrivaled in the modern world. The crystal skull, for example, was cut with such infinite precision that no known modern tool could have replicated the job. They were familiar with the amplification power of crystals in laser technology and memory chips. Also, they made extensive use of mass mental telepathy, psychokinesis, astral projection into fourth-dimensional consciousness. Now, I watched that episode of Expedition Unknown where Josh Gates has the skull examined by experts that claim the skull is a modern-day construction. I sometimes wonder just how much faith we should put in folks doing the examinations. If they have a vested interest in debunking something, say they get money from a university to do their research, and that university has folks who base their enormous incomes on saying ancient America didn't have any kind of advanced technology. Do you think that just maybe they might fudge the test results just a smidge so the item doesn't go against the accepted thoughts of those in charge? I tend to see conspiracies all over the place, especially nowadays when the news agencies make up the news to promote their own agendas. Edgar Casey said the people of Atlantis had constructed giant laser-like crystals for power plants, and that these were responsible for the second destruction of the land. Casey blamed the final destruction of Atlantis and the disintegration of their culture on greed and lust. According to Casey, 2 rival parties fought for control of the Atlanteans in its final days. The children of the Law of One wanted to return to spiritual stewardship of the land based on natural laws. The other group, the Sons of Belial, wanted to exploit natural resources for material gain. The chief focus of their conflict was a third class of dull, half-awake subhumans that the Sons of Belial used for slave labor. The children of the Law of One wanted to enlighten these sub-beings by raising their consciousness. However, the Sons of Belial wanted to keep them in ignorance and exploit them for their own gain. I know this sounds a little bit far-fetched idea on how people might behave, unless you know anything of how our school system was manipulated back in the early 1900s. Rockefeller said he didn't want a nation of thinkers, he wanted a nation of workers. So just teach them enough they can do the job and not wonder where all the money is going. Rockefeller donated millions to the school system as long as they taught what he wanted them to teach and nothing more. That's why schools focus more on following the rules and not so much on problem solving. That's why the elites send their kids to private schools, and their kids are at an advantage when it comes to thinking. If you don't think this is so, why do you suppose they run the entire planet? Casey revealed that before the legendary land disappeared under the waves, there was an exodus of many Atlanteans to ancient Egypt. He attributed the biblical great flood of Noah to being a result of the sinking of the last huge remains of Atlantis. He also revealed that many Atlanteans that managed to escape had hoped to preserve a record of their civilization. Thus, they created two separate archives with all their history and accomplishments so they could preserve them. Casey said that the Atlanteans buried one of these archives under one of the Sphinx's paws. Recently, there have been new research conducted around the Sphinx with new technology. During one of the Discovery Channel specials, researchers confirmed that, in fact, they could see a room under the left paw of the Sphinx. However, the Egyptian Director of Antiquities doesn't allow excavation in the area for any reason. During Casey's otherworldly journeys, he would often reveal the past lives of those who came to him for information concerning their health. He told a number of them that they had past lives in the legendary lost land of Atlantis. In fact, Casey revealed that a vast number of souls who had past lives in Atlantis had been reincarnated into America for a long time now. Reincarcerated. That means you got rearrested. Reincarnated. To be recreated. In all, Casey referred to Atlantis no fewer than 700 times over the span of 20 years. Casey revealed information about the history of humanity ranging from the beginning, the creation, to a time in the future when humans will evolve into beings with supernatural powers. One thing he was always very emphatic about: he believed that his horrible future events he predicted would not necessarily happen. He said by warning people of what future events might come, that people had the ability to change their direction, and thus these horrible predictions wouldn't come true. Casey repeatedly said that even the Lord of Lords could not accurately predict future events, because human free will can alter and change the future. He used as reference the biblical account when Jesus was asked when he would return, and he replied, "No one knows about that day or hour, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father." That is Matthew 24:36. Casey said he was the reincarnation of a priest from Atlantis. For some years, the ARE, the Association for Research and Enlightenment, members and the organization itself have conducted expeditions in search of the ruins of any remains of the lost continent of Atlantis. According to Casey, Atlantis, located from the Gulf of Mexico to Gibraltar, was destroyed in a final catastrophic event circa 10,000 BC. The focus of the ARE efforts has been in the Bimini area. However, other related locations have also been investigated. Research on the so-called Bimini Road has been hampered as researchers are split on the origins of the structure. Some believe it is man-made road or foundation, while others assert it is a natural beach rock, which fractured in places. However, the seldom discussed fact is that a portion of the Bimini Road was removed during a hurricane in 1926. Before the end of the last ice age, 12,000 years ago, the ocean levels were at least 300 feet below their current levels. A vast island was in the area of these remote times rather than chains of islands. Edgar Cayce referred to Bimini as one of the mountain tops of ancient Atlantis. While few would consider the island as a mountain, 12,000 years ago it was one of the highest points on a vast land formation in the region. Bimini and Andros Islands, laying about 100 miles to the east of Bimini, were a part of the same island in 10,000 BC called Poseidia. According to Cayce, it was covered by the slime of ages. This record hall is identical to the one in Egypt under the Sphinx. This would have been their second location of their archives. Divers went down to the Bimini Road to see if this was a natural or man-made structure. They found that the flat rocks along the surface were being supported by many smaller rocks that had been wedged in underneath them. This was kind of like how the Romans built the roads, many of which are still in better shape than our highways today. What little remains of the road is about a half a mile long. The rest was wiped out by hurricanes over the years. The road is flat and it runs southwest to northeast. Think of how many roads we have today that would still be here 10,000 years from now. Think of how many roads would still be here in 100 years. Every time I drive up and down I-35, I think, where are the Romans when you need them? Another theory on what happened to Atlantis involves aliens from outer space that didn't so much destroy the island as fly it. The island was supposed to have been a giant spaceship that landed in the ocean. When sailors saw it, they simply assumed it was an island. After spending some time there, anywhere from months to decades, the aliens left, flying away back to where they had come from. On another line of thought, the ship submerged itself. Sailors, seeing the giant ship sinking into the ocean, thought the island was being destroyed by some unknown force. Then there's the Antarctic. If a ship sailed past the Pillars of Hercules and turned left, and then sailed south for 8,700 miles, they'd wind up in Antarctica. Plato never said how far past the Pillars you had to go. Stories keep coming up from the frozen continent about unusual structures being discovered beneath the ice. The pyramids are among some of these odd findings. Now, Antarctica is way too big and was never located between Europe and America, but it could still hold some of the secrets that might answer questions on what became of Atlantis. Had a landmass existed in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean that for unknown reasons sank into the water, would anything have survived thousands of years of storms washing away everything? I doubt the mainstream scientists will tell us if they did find anything. Folks like to hold on to their secrets. Anytime someone does find something that could possibly be connected to Atlantis, the nasty naysayers will rush out and bury the story under tons of misinformation. The island was there, and now it is not, and we may never know the whole story. I hope you enjoyed tonight's show. This was a lot of reading and digging to get what little I could that didn't sound way too crazy. If you liked tonight's show, tell your friends. Heck, tell people you don't even know. I could always use a few extra people listening in. Till next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder 3. Strange things that happen here. How stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?